Wait, do not move past this moment too quickly, because something unusual has been unfolding in silence, and tonight you are about to hear a piece of it. Not a rumor. Not a fantasy. Not a coincidence. A conversation happened. A quiet one. The kind of conversation people have when they think nobody important is listening. And somehow, your name found its way into that conversation. Pause for a second. What if someone has been carrying thoughts about you far longer than you realize? What if the words they never said directly to you became the very words they shared with someone else? The strange thing is this. Your soulmate never planned to talk about you. At least, not at first. It happened naturally. A simple moment. An ordinary day. A question from a friend. A passing comment. And suddenly, without expecting it, they found themselves speaking about you. Not because they were forced to. Not because someone demanded answers. But because something about you has remained in their mind. Longer than they expected. Much longer. You see, there are people who enter our lives for a moment and disappear from memory like footprints in sand. Then there are rare souls. The unforgettable ones. The people who leave behind questions. Curiosity. Wonder. A feeling that refuses to fade. And whether you know it or not, you have become one of those rare souls in someone's story. The conversation began quietly. Someone asked them a simple question. Nothing dramatic. Nothing life-changing. Just a casual question. Have you been thinking about anyone lately? For a brief moment they smiled. Then looked away. And that reaction alone revealed more than words ever could. Because sometimes silence tells the truth before speech arrives. Stay with me. This is where things become interesting. When they finally answered, they didn't start by describing your appearance. They didn't talk about achievements. They didn't mention anything obvious. Instead, they spoke about a feeling. A feeling they could not fully explain. They said there was something different about you. Something difficult to put into words. As if your presence carried a kind of energy they had not encountered before. Not louder. Not brighter. Just different. Have you ever met someone and felt as though they belonged in a chapter of your future before you even understood why? That was the feeling they tried to describe. And the person listening immediately noticed it. Because people can hear when someone's voice changes. People can hear when a simple conversation suddenly becomes personal. Your soulmate didn't realize it, but the moment they started talking about you, their entire tone shifted. Their words slowed. Their thoughts became careful. As if they were holding something valuable. As if they were speaking about someone who mattered. Now listen carefully. The next thing they said was unexpected. They admitted that you make them think differently. Not because you told them to. Not because you tried to influence them. But because something about your journey reminds them of possibilities they almost forgot existed. And that realization surprised even them. You might not see your own impact. Most people don't. Most people underestimate how deeply they affect others. Yet somewhere, someone has been reflecting on qualities within you that you barely recognize yourself. And while you have been questioning certain parts of your path, they have been quietly admiring the way you continue moving forward. Even during moments when nobody applauds. Even during moments when nobody notices. There is another layer to this story. A deeper one. Because the conversation did not end there. In fact, what happened next revealed something your soulmate never intended to reveal. The person listening asked one more question. A question so simple that it almost sounded harmless. But the answer changed everything. They asked, "So what is it about them that stays on your mind?" And for the first time, your soulmate stopped pretending they had a simple explanation. The silence that followed said more than words. Because sometimes the heart knows something long before the mind catches up. And what they finally said next was the moment the entire conversation transformed. That is where this story truly begins. And what was revealed after that silence may explain far more than you expect. For a moment, nothing was said. The room remained quiet. The question had already been asked. So what is it about them that stays on your mind? Simple words. Yet those words seemed to unlock a door your soulmate had been keeping closed without even realizing it. Sometimes the most important truths are not hidden because we want to hide them. Sometimes they remain hidden because we have never stopped long enough to understand them ourselves. And that is exactly what happened. Your soulmate sat there thinking. Searching. Trying to find the right words. Not because they wanted to impress anyone. Not because they were creating a story. But because for the first time, they were being completely honest. What came next surprised even them. They said, "It's strange. Every time I think I've moved on with my day, something reminds me of them. A song. A place. A random thought. A certain type of laughter. A small detail nobody else would notice. And suddenly you would appear in their mind again. Not as a distraction. Not as an interruption. But as a presence. As if some invisible thread kept bringing their attention back to you." The person listening smiled. Because by now the pattern had become obvious. What your soulmate was describing wasn't ordinary curiosity. It wasn't temporary fascination. It was connection. The kind that arrives quietly. The kind that grows without permission. The kind that reveals itself long after it has already taken root. But here is where the conversation became even more revealing. The listener asked another question. "Do you think they know how much you think about them?" Your soulmate laughed softly. A nervous laugh. The kind people make when they are standing close to a truth they are not ready to fully admit. Then they answered. "No. Just one word." Yet behind that word was an entire ocean of emotion. Because they genuinely believe you have no idea. No idea how often your name appears in their thoughts. No idea how many times they have imagined conversations that never happened. No idea how often they have wondered what your future looks like. No idea how many possibilities they have quietly considered. And perhaps the most surprising part. No idea how much hope they secretly attach to those thoughts. Stay here for another moment. Because the next revelation changed the energy completely. The listener looked directly at them and asked, "What do you feel when you think about them?" This time there was no immediate answer. No quick response. No easy explanation. Only silence. And sometimes silence is the most honest answer of all. Because some feelings are too large for ordinary language. Eventually your soulmate spoke. And what they said carried a depth they had never expressed before. They said you make them feel calm. Not because life around them is calm. Not because everything is perfect. But because thinking about you reminds them that meaningful things still exist. That genuine people still exist. That real connection is still possible. Imagine that. While you have been living your life, facing your own challenges, questioning your own direction, someone has been privately associating your existence with hope. Not fantasy. Not illusion. Hope. A future possibility they cannot fully explain. And that realization caught them off guard. Because before that conversation, they had never spoken those words aloud. Not even to themselves. By now the listener could see exactly what was happening. The pieces were beginning to connect. And so they asked one final question. A question that made your soulmate completely freeze. A question that seemed simple on the surface but carried enormous weight beneath it. They asked, "Do you think you're falling for them?" The air changed. The conversation changed. Everything changed. Because for the first time all evening, your soulmate had nowhere left to hide. Before we continue, let me pause for just a second. If this message is speaking to you, if you've ever felt that unseen connections can shape the future in unexpected ways, leave a comment sharing where you're listening from. And if these messages help you reflect, subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Now listen closely. Your soulmate did not answer immediately. They looked away. They smiled. Then they became quiet. Very quiet. Because deep down they already knew the answer. The truth had been building long before that conversation ever began. And the words they finally spoke next were the words that made everyone listening understand just how important you had become. That answer is where everything takes a completely unexpected turn. Something shifted in that moment. Not outside. Not in the room. Inside them. The question still hung in the air. Do you think you're falling for them? A simple sentence. Yet it carried enough weight to stop every other thought. Your soulmate could have laughed it off. They could have changed the subject. They could have hidden behind uncertainty. But something inside them was growing tired of pretending. And so, after a long pause, they finally spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. They said, "I don't know exactly when it happened." The listener leaned forward. Because that answer alone revealed more than 100 explanations ever could. You see, people usually remember the moment they become interested in someone. But genuine feelings often arrive differently. There is no announcement. No warning. No single event. One day a person is simply another face in the crowd. Then somehow, without realizing it, they become someone whose absence is noticed. Someone whose happiness matters. Someone whose name creates an unexpected smile. And that was exactly what your soulmate was trying to describe. They admitted that at first, they ignored it. They thought it would pass. They assumed it was temporary. Yet instead of fading, the feeling became stronger. Not louder. Stronger. Like a quiet river slowly carving its way through stone. The listener asked them what changed. And what they answered next was something they had never shared before. They said there was a moment when they realized they had started imagining your future. Not just their own future. Yours. Think about that. Out of all the people in the world, your story had somehow become important to them. They wondered if you were happy. They wondered if your plans were working out. They wondered whether the things you hoped for would finally arrive. And those thoughts kept returning. Again. And again. And again. Not because they were forcing them. Because they were genuine. There is something fascinating about human connection. When someone truly begins to care, their focus changes. They stop asking, "What can this person do for me?" and start wondering, "I hope good things happen for them." That was the realization unfolding inside your soulmate. The listener could see it clearly now. The conversation had moved far beyond simple curiosity. Far beyond casual interest. This was something deeper. Something still growing. Something still becoming. Yet the most powerful moment had not happened yet. Because suddenly the listener asked a question nobody expected. A question that completely changed the direction of everything. They asked, "If you had one chance to tell them something right now, what would you say?" The room became quiet once more. And this silence felt different. Heavier. More meaningful. Because now there were no distractions. No theories. No explanations. Only truth. Your soulmate stared into the distance. Thinking carefully. Choosing words they had never spoken before. And then, slowly, they began to answer. Not with a confession. Not with grand promises. Not with dramatic declarations. Instead, they spoke from the deepest part of themselves. They said they would tell you not to doubt your value. They would tell you that the qualities you overlook are often the exact qualities others admire. They would tell you that your persistence inspires more people than you realize. They would tell you that the way you keep moving forward, even during uncertain seasons, has left a lasting impression. But then something unexpected happened. Halfway through speaking, they stopped. The listener immediately noticed. Because it looked as though another thought had appeared. A more important thought. A deeper thought. One they had been carrying for a long time. And after a brief pause, your soulmate said something that changed the entire atmosphere. They said, "I think the reason I keep talking about them is because they feel familiar. Not familiar in the ordinary sense. Not because of shared routines. Not because of shared experiences. But familiar in a way that is difficult to explain. Like meeting someone and feeling as though their presence belongs in a chapter of your future you haven't reached yet." The listener became completely silent. Because there was nothing left to question. The truth was already visible. Not in the words. In the emotion behind them. Your soulmate had spent so much time trying to understand why you remained on their mind that they never noticed something important. The answer was never hidden. The answer had been present from the beginning. You mattered. More than they expected. More than they admitted. More than they fully understood. And now, after speaking those thoughts aloud, they could no longer pretend otherwise. Yet before the conversation ended, one final realization arrived. A realization so unexpected that it left everyone speechless. Because your soulmate suddenly understood something about you. Something they had overlooked for a very long time. And when that realization surfaced, the entire conversation took a direction nobody saw coming. What they discovered in that final moment would stay with them long after the conversation was over. And that discovery is where the next chapter begins. There are moments in life when a single realization rearranges everything. Not because the world changes, because your perspective does. And that is exactly what happened next. The conversation should have been over by then. The questions had already been answered. The thoughts had already been shared. Yet something inside your soulmate refused to let the moment end. Almost as if another truth was waiting beneath the surface. Something they had never fully recognized. Something that had been quietly present from the beginning. The listener noticed it immediately. Your soulmate had become unusually quiet. Not uncomfortable. Not nervous. Thoughtful. Deeply thoughtful. As though they were looking back over countless memories and seeing them differently for the first time. Have you ever reread a story years later and suddenly understood a part you completely missed before? That was what was happening. Memory after memory started connecting. Small moments. Simple moments. Moments that once seemed ordinary. But now they carried new meaning. And then your soulmate said something that nobody expected. They said, "I think I misunderstood them." The listener looked surprised. "What do you mean?" Your soulmate smiled softly. Not the smile of someone discovering a mistake. The smile of someone discovering a truth. They explained that for a long time they had focused on what you said. Your words. Your actions. Your choices. But now they realized something deeper. The most remarkable thing about you was not what you showed the world. It was what remained consistent underneath it all. Your character. Your resilience. Your ability to keep moving forward even when nobody knew how much effort it required. Suddenly all those little moments began making sense. Moments they once overlooked. Moments they now saw clearly. And the more they reflected, the more one realization became impossible to ignore. You were not pretending to be strong. You simply kept choosing growth. Again and again. Even when it would have been easier to quit. Even when nobody was watching. And that realization affected them more than they expected. Because somewhere along the way, your example had started influencing their own life. Think about that for a moment. Without trying. Without knowing. Without planning it. You had become a source of perspective in someone else's journey. The listener sat quietly. Because by now they understood this conversation was no longer about attraction. It was about impact. The kind of impact people rarely recognize they are having. The kind that happens silently. The kind that grows over time. Then came another unexpected question. If they were sitting here right now, what do you think they would be surprised to hear? Your soulmate laughed. This time the answer came quickly. They would be surprised to know how often they've inspired me. The room fell silent again. Not because the answer was shocking. Because it was sincere. And sincerity has a way of stopping people in their tracks. There was no performance in those words. No attempt to sound impressive. Only honesty. Your soulmate explained that whenever they thought about giving up on something important, a memory of your persistence would often appear. Whenever they doubted a goal, they would remember how you continued moving toward yours. Whenever life felt uncertain, they found themselves remembering the way you handled uncertainty. And little by little, Those memories became encouragement. The listener nodded. Because the truth had become impossible to deny. You had affected your soulmate's life long before either of you fully understood it. Now stay with me. Because the most meaningful part of the conversation was still ahead. The listener asked one final question before everything ended. A question that seemed simple. Yet it carried enormous significance. They asked, "What do you hope happens next?" Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Instead they looked down, smiled, and took a deep breath. As though they were choosing between fear and honesty. Then finally they spoke. They said they hoped life would create the right timing. Not forced timing. Not rushed timing. The right timing. Because some connections are not meant to be hurried. Some stories need space to unfold naturally. Some paths need time before they finally cross in the way they were always meant to. And for the first time all evening, there was complete peace in their voice. No confusion. No uncertainty. Only trust. Trust that what is meant to grow will grow. Trust that what is meant to arrive will arrive. Trust that meaningful connections have a way of finding their proper moment. Before we continue this journey, if this message resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how many people connect with the same message at the exact right moment. And if you've been enjoying these stories, subscribing helps you stay connected to future messages like this one. But the story doesn't end there. Because after the conversation finished, after everyone went their separate ways, after the questions stopped, your soulmate experienced one final moment alone. A moment nobody else witnessed. A moment that revealed what they truly felt when there was nobody left to impress. And what happened during that quiet moment would become the clearest answer of all. Because sometimes the deepest truths appear only after the conversation is over. And what your soulmate realized next was something they would never forget. The conversation was over. The chairs emptied. The voices faded. One by one, everyone returned to their own lives. Yet something unusual remained. Not in the room. Not in the air. Inside your soulmate. Because some conversations end when the words stop. Others continue long afterward. And this was one of those conversations. As they walked away, they replayed everything in their mind. Every question. Every answer. Every moment of honesty they had unexpectedly shared. At first, they tried to focus on other things. Daily responsibilities. Tasks waiting to be completed. Messages. Plans. The ordinary rhythm of life. But something kept pulling their attention back. Not forcefully. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a distant melody that refuses to leave your mind. And eventually they stopped resisting it. For the first time that day, they allowed themselves to sit alone with their thoughts. No audience. No listener. No expectations. Just silence. Pure silence. The kind of silence where truth finally has room to speak. And that is when the realization arrived. Not as a sudden shock. Not as a dramatic revelation. But as a calm certainty. A certainty that had been growing for far longer than they realized. You had become part of their vision of the future. Not because they planned it. Not because they forced it. Because it happened naturally. Every time they imagined positive changes ahead, you appeared somewhere in the picture. Every time they thought about meaningful conversations, you appeared. Every time they imagined sharing victories, lessons, growth, and new experiences, somehow, your presence found its way into those thoughts. And once they noticed this pattern, they could no longer ignore it. The truth became impossible to overlook. You were no longer simply someone they thought about. You had become someone they hoped for. Pause here for a moment. Because there is a difference. A significant difference. People think about many things. But hope is reserved for what truly matters. And that realization changed everything. Your soulmate began reflecting on all the reasons they had tried to explain their connection to you. Attraction. Curiosity. Admiration. Interest. Yet none of those explanations felt complete. They were pieces of the puzzle. But not the entire picture. The entire picture was something much simpler. They genuinely cared. Not because they had all the answers. Not because they knew exactly how the future would unfold. But because somewhere along the way, your happiness had started mattering to them. Your growth had started mattering. Your journey had started mattering. And that realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. For so long they had been searching for explanations. Trying to define every feeling. Trying to understand every thought. Now they no longer felt the need. Because some things are understood best when they are felt rather than analyzed. The night grew quieter. Hours passed. And still they found themselves reflecting on one specific part of the conversation. The moment they were asked what they would say to you. That question continued echoing inside their mind. Because afterward, they realized there was one thing they forgot to say. One thing they wished they had expressed. One simple truth. If somehow those words could reach you, they would want you to know this. You are far more memorable than you believe. Not because of perfection. Not because of extraordinary achievements. Not because of any single quality. But because you carry something rare. Authenticity. In a world where many people try to become what others expect, you continue becoming who you truly are. And that authenticity leaves an impression. A lasting one. A powerful one. The kind people remember long after the conversation ends. That was the truth your soulmate finally understood. And strangely enough, once they accepted it, everything felt lighter. Clearer. More peaceful. There was no longer a need to rush. No need to force outcomes. No need to predict every step ahead. Only a quiet appreciation for the connection itself. For the possibility it represented. For the future chapters that had not yet been written. And as the evening came to an end, one final thought crossed their mind. A thought so simple that most people would overlook it. Yet it became the most important realization of all. They smiled and thought. Maybe the reason I keep talking about them isn't because I'm trying to understand them anymore. A pause. A deep breath. A quiet smile. Then the rest of the thought arrived. Maybe it's because they already mean more to me than I realized. And with that realization, something inside them settled. Not finished. Not complete. Simply understood. Because some connections are not meant to be explained in a single conversation. Some stories reveal themselves chapter by chapter, moment by moment, choice by choice. And somewhere ahead, beyond today's questions and today's uncertainties, another chapter is already waiting. A chapter neither of you can fully see yet, but one that is quietly moving closer with every passing day. Until then, your soulmate carries the memory of that conversation. The conversation where your name appeared unexpectedly. The conversation where hidden thoughts became spoken words. The conversation where they finally discovered what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. And perhaps, without even realizing it, that conversation was only the beginning. Days passed. Then more days. Life continued the way it always does. Morning became evening. Plans replaced plans. New conversations appeared. Old conversations faded. Yet one conversation refused to disappear. The one about you. Strange, isn't it? Out of everything people discuss throughout a week. Out of all the faces they meet. Out of all the responsibilities they carry. Certain moments stay alive. Certain names linger. Certain thoughts keep returning. And your soulmate began noticing exactly that. They realized they weren't remembering the conversation because someone asked about you. They were remembering it because speaking about you had revealed something they had never fully admitted to themselves. For the first time, they had heard their own feelings out loud. And hearing them changed everything. Sometimes we don't understand what is living inside our hearts until we hear ourselves speak it. That is why the conversation stayed with them. Not because of the questions. Because of the answers. Every answer pointed toward the same truth. Every answer led back to the same person. You. Now listen carefully. Because this is where the story reaches its quietest and most meaningful point. One evening, while sitting alone, your soulmate found themselves thinking about something unexpected. Not your future. Not their future. The present. This very moment. They began wondering what you were doing right now. Whether you were smiling. Whether you were chasing something important. Whether you were doubting yourself again. Whether you knew how valuable you truly are. And suddenly a realization appeared. A realization that felt almost impossible to ignore. They understood that what drew them toward you was never a single quality. It was the way you made them see life differently. Think about that. Many people enter our lives and leave us exactly as they found us. But every so often, someone arrives whose presence quietly changes our perspective. Someone who reminds us that growth is possible. Someone who reminds us that meaningful connections still exist. Someone who inspires without even trying. That was the role you had unknowingly played. Not through grand gestures. Not through dramatic moments. Through consistency. Through authenticity. Through simply being yourself. And the more they reflected on this, the more grateful they became. Not because everything was perfect. Not because every answer had arrived. But because some journeys are beautiful precisely because they are still unfolding. The listener from that original conversation had unknowingly started something important. A chain reaction of reflection. A chain reaction of awareness. A chain reaction of truth. Because now your soulmate could see something clearly that had once been hidden. The connection was not built on imagination. It was built on respect. Admiration. Curiosity. hope. And above all else, a genuine appreciation for who you are becoming. Stay with me until the very end. Because there is one final piece to this story. The piece that ties everything together. Weeks after that conversation, your soulmate was asked about you again. Not by the same person. Not in the same place. A completely different situation. A completely different day. Yet the response came immediately. There was no hesitation this time. No confusion. No searching for answers. Only clarity. When your name came up, they smiled. The kind of smile that appears naturally. The kind that cannot be forced. And someone nearby noticed. They asked, "Why do you always smile when you talk about them?" For a second, your soulmate laughed softly. Then they gave the simplest answer of all. An answer far shorter than the long explanations they once struggled to find. They said, "Because they remind me that some things are worth believing in." That was it. No dramatic speech. No complicated reasoning. Just one honest sentence. And sometimes the simplest truths are the most powerful. Because after everything, after all the questions, after all the reflection, after all the hidden thoughts became spoken words, the feeling they carried toward you could be summarized in that single idea. You represent possibility. The possibility of meaningful connection. The possibility of shared growth. The possibility that some people enter our lives for a reason we cannot immediately understand. And whether your paths fully align tomorrow, next month, or sometime further ahead, that possibility continues to shine quietly within them. So if there is one message hidden inside this entire story, it is this. Never underestimate the impact you have on people. Never assume your presence goes unnoticed. Never believe that your efforts, your growth, your kindness, or your authenticity disappear into the background. Because somewhere, often in ways you cannot see, they are creating ripples. Ripples that travel farther than you realize. Ripples that reach hearts you never expected. Ripples that become conversations. And sometimes, those conversations become the beginning of something unforgettable. This story began with a secret conversation about you. But it ends with something far more meaningful. Not what your soulmate said. Not what they admitted. Not what they discovered. It ends with what they finally understood. That certain people leave a mark on the heart simply by being who they are. And whether they speak your name quietly or openly. Whether they share their thoughts today or someday in the future. One truth remains unchanged. The memory of you continues to inspire a smile. And that smile may be the most honest thing they ever said.